Forsyth, that's Michael Forsyth, who was Scottish Secretary under John Major. Angela Smith, the former Labour Minister. And we have Lord Newby there, the Lib Dem leader in the Lords. He's in place representing his party. And while the peers wait, the MPs and other peers are waiting next door, well, just about next door, in the Royal Gallery itself. On either side, 17 peers and 17 members of Parliament who, unlike the peers in the chamber, who are there for specific reasons, these have been competitive. They put their names into a ballot. So I'm just thinking, Laura, at this point, it's interesting to note from the selection of people there who was keen to come. They include, for example, Lord Lamont, who's there, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer. They include Lord Hannan, Daniel Hannan, the former MEP, and a range of people from the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And I think it's fair to say that after us, given the fact that we can see everything from here, they've not got a bad view, have they really? It's not too bad, yeah.
I think they probably have the best view in the House, and especially actually because there's so few people there this year.
Yeah. Back at Buckingham Palace, we have Her Majesty the Queen leaving in a vehicle that we don't often see the Queen using, I think it's fair to say, on days like this. But it is a set of special circumstances governing today's event. I think it's also fair to say that. So passing the Queen Victoria Memorial on this very familiar ceremonial route along the Mall, and is passing Green Park on one side and now flanking St James's Park on the other, and on her way to Horse Guards, past the Guards Memorial there on the right-hand side of the cavalcade, and ready to cross the expanse of Horse Guards, and they'll be down at Parliament within a few minutes' time. Back in Central Lobby, the Inspector, ready to tell strangers to take their hats off, in other words, non-members, to show respect for the Speaker. Waiting for the signal. Speaker's procession happens every day that the Commons is in session. This same procedure.
Hats off, strangers!
Very familiar scene for those who watch the state opening, but for all of those visitors who come to the Houses of Parliament. The Sergeant-at-Arms leading the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the MP for Chorley, originally elected as a Labour MP, but now, of course, not a party-aligned MP as Speaker. Sir Lindsay, whose father was a Labour MP before him, Doug Hoyle, who's now a member of the House of Lords. So the announcements of the Speaker's on the way, down towards the members' lobby of the House of Commons, preceded by the Sergeant-at-Arms. We heard from him a little while ago, past Churchill on the left and Lloyd George on the right, and into the chamber where there will be prayers, and that will signal the closing of the doors. And here's the Queen arriving in the Palace of Westminster at the Sovereign's entrance. The state trumpeters in place, ready to sound the fanfare. So a shorter wait probably than usual because the Queen will not be wearing the state robes or the crown. So just a few last-minute conversations before the procession is underway. And as Laura was saying earlier, those present in the Royal Gallery will have the best view of the day, I suspect, because they will be within a few feet of Her Majesty as she makes her way down to the House of Lords, Prince of Wales too, and the Duchess of Cornwall. We have representatives here of the armed forces, of the royal households, and of course the great offices reflecting the tradition of the royal family and the great royal palaces going back over centuries. So this state opening of Parliament of May 2021 gets underway with the Prince of Wales accompanying Her Majesty the Queen in procession behind the imperial state crown, which is the great symbol of the Queen's authority. Duchess of Cornwall just following behind the Prince and Her Majesty. Queen will enter the House of Lords, and in a pattern that is now extremely familiar to Her Majesty, given that this is her 67th state opening, having passed the statue of Queen Victoria, enter the Lords and will take her place on the great throne. And will then give the signal for the House of Commons to be summoned. Crown being brought into the House of Lords, everyone stands. And they will await the Queen's signal.
My Lords, pray be seated.
Signal has been given, and it's been received in the central lobby. And Blackrod on her way to summon the MPs. The monarch's representative, and in the tradition, will have to knock on the door of the House of Commons. A reminder of the days when the monarch tried to arrest some members of Parliament.
Close the door! It's Blackrod. Open the door. Blackrod!
Mr. Speaker, the Queen commands this House of Peers.
A few words lost there, but we are familiar, of course, with the words of Blackrod to attend Her Majesty in the House of Peers. In other words, Sergeant-at-Arms and Blackrod leading the way, and there we have the Prime Minister on the left-hand side on the government benches. The Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, part of this rather small group of MPs making their way today. Prime Minister followed by Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. And there we have Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, Ian Blackford for the Scottish National Party. And I'll just bring Laura in here because normally, Laura, of course, the Prime Minister and opposition leader would be chatting and walking together.
They
so
would.
This is a very different setup.
It's a very different setup. Well, they would be walking together, but sometimes actually not chatting, which was always also rather interesting when you saw the level of tensions between the main opposition and the governing party. But just watching Boris Johnson there with Keir Starmer several paces behind, both of them, of course, in the last few days, dealing with the aftermath of a huge set of election results from right across the country, the Conservatives having huge success in much of England, the Labour Party having a very difficult time. But that's not to say that the government is also free of headaches. You know, that constitutional argument that we've already been referring to is very much also on the government's mind. But also just interesting to see the new Labour Chief Whip there, Alan Campbell,
Yes.
in his place, with the veteran Chief Whip Nick Brown having been removed as part of this reshuffle, and Labour's turmoil in recent days also surely must be on Keir Starmer's mind.
So the social distancing very much in evidence. They'd normally be crowded into that central place.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, my government's priority is to deliver a national recovery from the pandemic. I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
The Lord High Chancellor acknowledges that the Queen has ended the reading of the Queen's speech, and the Marquis of Cholmondeley brings back the imperial state crown for the procession through the Prince's Gallery and back to the Royal Gallery and to the robing room. Relatively brief in terms of duration, as the Queen's speech usually is, but that touched a lot of themes, and there were some brief sentences there which actually were references to major pieces of legislation, or certainly major potential areas for legislation, which we'll discuss in a moment. The Prince's Chamber and back into the Royal Gallery itself. Prince of Wales escorting his mother, Her Majesty the Queen. They're followed by the Duchess of Cornwall. Crown which will be returned to the Tower of London. As will the other regalia that we saw earlier, the Sword of State and the Cap of Maintenance. The Queen looking carefully around the Royal Gallery and no doubt reflecting on the fact that it is not full of 600 diplomatic guests and representatives of the armed forces and peers guests, as it normally is. It's a very, very different sight and a very different feel. And here we have the members returning. That's Sir Geoffrey Donaldson there from the Unionists of Northern Ireland, as one of the small band of MPs who made their way. Sir Ed Davey for the Lib Dems, Ian Blackford for the SNP, and in they come back into the chamber. The chamber, of course, in the next few days will be dealing with the content of the Queen's speech. There will be a debate. Prime Minister, having just nipped out past the Speaker's chair, back to where the Prime Minister's suite of offices lies, just behind there in the corridors behind the chair, and no doubt reflecting on a rather brief ceremonial event today.
I need to take my driving licence or my passport. Pretty much everything I do, I need to prove who I am. I personally think there's probably a case even for looking at, having ID online, because we know that there's a lot of fraud online, and we know that's affecting people as well.
We're just seeing the Prince of Wales and the Duchess leaving. Minister, sorry, for just a second. And they're using the staircase here to go down past the regalia room, which is the little room at the bottom there, where normally they hold on to the crown and the other regalia before they are put on display. So past that room and turning left, and then the cars will be there ready to take them back, in this case, to Clarence House. And there we have Lord Macfall just opposite us there, the new Lord Speaker, and the Lord High Chancellor, and the Prince of Wales exchanging a few words once again with the Garter King of Arms, Thomas Woodcock. The Duchess down to the Sovereign's entrance here, and the Marquis of Cholmondeley, who's just exchanging a few words with the Prince. And then we have the Duke of Norfolk here on the left-hand side, who's the Earl Marshal, who, as I said earlier, is in charge of great state events, including the state opening, but more particularly maybe coronations and investitures and great weddings and funerals too. So a few words with the Duke of Norfolk. The Earl Marshal is a hereditary role, centuries old in terms of the functions that the royal family shares out. So the Prince and the Duchess are leaving. And Minister, you were just saying that you think that forms of ID are now so much part of our life that they're pretty much unavoidable. But clearly there is that cost question. So,
the details, which could happen, by the way. If you look at systems and you're looking at designing a system, you can see a hole in that system. So what we're looking to do is improve that system. As I say, you have to do it for almost everything now to get a parcel or whatever. But it won't cost the voter anything.
Does Labour have concerns about this?
We have great concerns. Gillian's talking here about having to go and get another piece of proof. Now, voting isn't like collecting a parcel. It's a right. It's something which every citizen of this country should enjoy with a minimum number of obstacles. Putting more obstacles in people's way will discourage voting. It will be, in my view, discriminatory, or it could be. There's a risk that it will be discriminatory, because we need to know at the moment how people are supposed to know about it, how to go and get that different form of ID, what processes would have to go through. Now, if this is a way of introducing ID cards through a different route, I think the government should be honest about it, and if it's not, there's a problem here.
Just a second, Thangam, just because we are seeing the last elements of the ceremony today. This is the last section of pageantry, if you like, because we're now seeing the crown and the sword and the cap being taken back to the Tower of London. And there we have the gentlemen at arms. I mentioned the Royal Bodyguard, the Yeomen of the Guard earlier, set up by Henry Tudor. Well, the gentlemen at arms created by Henry VIII in 1506, I think, though if I got that wrong, I'm sure there'll be very expert people telling me that within seconds on social media. I think it was 1506, but they're called the nearest guard because they are known as a more senior corps of royal bodyguards. Will soon be leaving. Thangam, you were saying that you do have big concerns about this ID issue.
I do, but also I think as we notice, we come to the end of today with the theatre, but also a very toned down, sombre approach to the theatre, which reflects the year we've just had. I'm really stunned that the government thinks this is such a priority. It's certainly not what's coming up on the doorstep. There's very little evidence of any systematic fraud. Fixing a problem that doesn't exist when we've actually got big problems that do exist. It's not what was coming up on the doorstep where I was knocking. Whether people voted Labour or Tory, they were telling me about problems with crime, cuts to police, feeling that schools and public health services had suffered 11 years of Tory rule. They weren't saying, if only we had an ID card. Right. I think that's a real problem.
Joanna, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with Sangam. I think she hit the nail on the head there at the end when she said, where is the evidence of the problem? I don't see the evidence of this problem. And I think we should be in the business of extending the franchise, as we've recently done in Scotland, not bringing in measures which might restrict people in exercising their right to vote. Now, at the election we've just had in Scotland, 16 and 17-year-olds voted, and so did refugees and foreign nationals with leave to remain. That's the sort of approach that we have in Scotland, and I think Boris Johnson's government would be better looking at extending the franchise in the way that we've done, rather than introducing measures which might stop people from exercising their democratic right.
We're back at the Sovereign's entrance, just for the departure of the Crown and the regalia, and back in reverse order. And again, we can see that there is a heavy presence of the most senior figures here from the household and from the offices here at Westminster. And the sword is being placed in the car, ready for that journey back. We go back to Buckingham Palace initially, and as I say, then back to the Tower of London, where they are kept usually. There was a time, by the way, looking at these cars, when the crown jewels would be brought down to the Palace of Westminster on the river by barge. And some of the officers in charge of this part of the ceremony were technically known as barge masters, even when the barges had long disappeared. But today, as we say, they are safely in the cars and on their way back. And I just think, while we're watching the Crown and the symbol of authority leaving Westminster, Minister, could you just help us then, just on this, just to tie up this part of the debate?
Our manifesto, equally on the social care issue, let's see some meat on the bones. In Scotland, we had an independent review. The SNP committed to the principles of that independent review, and Nicola Sturgeon has said that she will introduce a national care service to oversee social care in Scotland within the term of the next Parliament. Finally, repeatedly in this speech, we heard that the government wanted to strengthen and renew democracy across the UK. The best way to strengthen and renew democracy would be to respect the outcome of the election we had in Scotland last week, which the SNP won. There are 72 MSPs in the Scottish Parliament who want a second independence referendum, as opposed to 57 who don't. Boris Johnson should come to the negotiating table, as David Cameron had the decency to do in 2011. The civil servant, Kieran Martin, who negotiated the Edinburgh Agreement after the SNP victory in 2011, has said that the circumstances that pertain now are exactly the same as they were in 2011, and that therefore the British government should come to the negotiating table. The pandemic must be dealt with, but the British government is getting on with other aspects of the Constitution during the pandemic, and they need to speak to Nicola Sturgeon and her new government in Edinburgh about a second independence
Joanna, that's
referendum.
another 3-hour programme, but thank you very much for raising the point. Thank a quick line from you, sorry.
I think after the terrible year that we've had, which the ceremony this morning really reflected, our social care sector, our health sector, our education sector deserve to know that they are getting the reward that they really, truly deserve. We deserve to have a government that really takes seriously the massive crisis of climate change, the massive housing crisis, just typified by the failure to get a grip on the cladding crisis, which has blighted so many people's lives. There's any number of things which could have been headlines in this speech and seem to me to be sadly lacking.
Thank you very much, Laura. You and I will speak later, I think. Yes?
Sure we will.
Thank you very much. And can I just say to all of you,
thank you.
Really good contributions, and thank you very much for sharing your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All. It brings us to the end of our live coverage from the Palace of Westminster. A new session of Parliament has been opened by the Queen in her 95th year, and a new government programme has been set out, though, as we know, it's already controversial. Coverage of the debate on the speech will continue on the BBC News channel this afternoon. But from all of my guests here, from Laura and from me, from all of the BBC team at Westminster, thanks for watching and goodbye.
That makes the United Kingdom stronger, healthier, and more prosperous than before. To achieve this, my government will level up opportunities across all parts of the United Kingdom, supporting jobs, businesses, and economic growth, and addressing the impact of the pandemic on public services. My government will protect the health of the nation, continuing the vaccination programme and providing additional funding to support the NHS. My ministers will bring forward legislation to empower the NHS to innovate and embrace technology. Patients will receive more tailored and preventative care closer to home. Measures will be brought forward to support the health and well-being of the nation, including to tackle obesity and improve mental health. Proposals on social care reform will be brought forward. My government will ensure that the public finances are returned to a sustainable path once the economic recovery is secure. The United Kingdom is committed to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and will continue to lead the way internationally by hosting the COP26 summit in Glasgow. Legislation will set binding environmental targets. Legislation will also be brought forward to ensure the United Kingdom has and promotes the highest standards of animal welfare. My government will help more people to own their own home while enhancing the rights of those who rent. Laws to modernise the planning system so that more homes can be built will be brought forward, along with measures to end the practice of ground rents for new leasehold properties. My government will uphold human rights and democracy across the world. It will take forward a global effort to get 40 million girls across the world into school. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, other measures will be laid before you. I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.